can see well enough to read my notes here. Okay. Well, tonight we are undertaking a discussion of the person Saint Madarije of Libertyville, and I'm going to begin by stating, especially for those out there in radio land who might be Serbians, that I don't really have much of an idea how to pronounce Serbian names. So if I am mutilating them, it's not with bad intentions. I just don't know Serbian very well, but I believe it's Madarije of Libertyville. How many of you have heard of him? Okay, fairly surprising. How many of you know anything about him? Not too many hands went up. That was my situation. I decided to present on him tonight so that I could read about him and learn about him, because I really knew very little about him. I can sum up to you in 3 points what I knew, and that is, number one, he was a Serbian Orthodox bishop who served here in the United States. Secondly, his remains were found incorrupt at the monastery where he was interred in Libertyville, Illinois. And thirdly, he was canonized as a saint by the Serbian Orthodox Church. That was the limit of my knowledge. So I had to think there was probably a lot more interesting data to be found about him. And so we did a little research, and I'm here to present that to you. So let's dig a little deeper than that cursory knowledge into his life. He was born Ivan Uskokovic in a small village in Montenegro to a noble family that had an illustrious history of serving the cause of the Serbian people on December 22nd, 1889. Because of his family's somewhat elevated status, he was able to pursue an education, something that was hardly common for the villagers in the town where he grew up. So first he was able to attend a school locally in his home village, and then in the capital of Montenegro, where he went for still his second phase of primary education. And where at age 11, when he met the Metropolitan of Montenegro, of the capital city, he asked him to tonsure him a monk. But the Metropolitan thought better of that for an 11-year-old boy and kind of brushed him off. So his hopes at that point were dashed, only to be realized later. Then, having done well there in school, he went to Belgrade, which is, of course, the capital of Serbia, for his secondary education along with his brother. And there, he attended services in the main cathedral in Belgrade, which, if you know anything about it, it has been recently, rebuilt and expanded to be one of the largest Orthodox churches in the world. But anyway, at that time, as a young, shall we say, teenager, attending services there, he experienced a kind of spiritual awakening, out of which came a burning desire in his heart to serve Christ in the church. And this burning desire proved to be the lifelong motivator for everything that follows in his history. So he began to meet, when he had the opportunity, with the Metropolitan of Belgrade, expressing his spiritual aspirations. And finally, the Metropolitan recommended him to be accepted to the Studenica monastery. After 6 months, a 6-month novitiate, he was tonsured. Ivan was tonsured, a monk, and given the name Madarije at age 16. He didn't tell his parents. His parents knew nothing of this because they were likely to have been extremely displeased with his choice of monasticism as a vacation. In fact, they thought that he had contracted some strange disease and died. It was only years later that they actually found out he was still alive. And so, moving right along, in 1906, how old would he have been then? 17. He was ordained a deacon and sent to for further studies to the Theological Academy near Kiev, which then we know today, of course, as the capital of Ukraine, but which was part of the Russian Empire, as was Moldavia, which was his next stop in his educational journey in a place called Chisinau. In 1908, at a tender age, he was ordained a priest. And here's a quote from a sermon he preached in March 1910 in a chapel of a local orphanage. This orphanage was a big orphanage, and it had like a church in it. And here's what he had to say that day in the Church of St. Olga. My dear children, I visited your wealthy and valuable library. I saw very many interesting and beneficial books on various topics, and saw you often reading these fine tomes. But to my great sorrow and disappointment, I did not see the most important of all books. I looked throughout the library and could not find a single Bible. You are not to blame for this, nor are your teachers. It is the spirit of the time that is to blame contemporary society. Think of that, in the early 20th century. This wonderful book is very hard to find even in the most eminent homes. It is considered to be an old, boring book whose days have passed. Oh, how cruelly are people mistaken. There is no book more valuable than the Bible. There was not and will not ever be another book which can replace the Bible. There is no book in the whole world which contains so many teachings that can lead one to salvation, so much life and spirit as the Bible. How many wondrous and miraculous words are contained therein, thousands and millions of words that shine like the sun. When you read the Bible, you cannot help but be amazed and exclaim, oh, how divine, how wonderful. The words are like jewels that sparkle in the sunshine, sparkle under the sunlight of eternal love, and tell us of the great miracles of mercy of our great God. But why, dear children, is the Bible such an important and most important book? Because the words of the Bible are not words of man or of several people, but they are the words of God himself. Man could not write the Bible. Man is in no condition to elevate himself to such a height of sanctity and creativity. The author of the Bible is God himself, though he chose his selected few to inscribe the words. So from that, I'm not trying to convince you that St. Madarije was a biblical fundamentalist, but to give you an example of his elevated rhetoric and the piety that imbued his contemplations, that the true encounter that he himself reflected from his own experience of knowing God in and through the sacred scriptures. So in 1912, he graduated from Chisinau with the highest honors, summa cum laude, and he decided to pursue further education at the St. Petersburg Theological Academy in St. Petersburg, Russia, a highly esteemed institution of theology, from which he graduated with his advanced degree in theology after 4 years. After his graduation, he was asked about his goals for the future. This was his reply: to sow Christian love, spreading peace, quieting passions, preaching good, turning people into brothers. And that fundamental sentiment proved to be the guiding light of his life and ministry from that point forward. According to one of his biographers, he had a special place in his heart for the humbled and marginalized, whom he loved and cared for deeply. Compassion and mercy characterized his entire life, perhaps more than any other of his virtues. and his years were marked by constant almsgiving and works of charity. And so while there in Russia, he traveled far and wide even to some of the other republics as we know them today, visiting prisons and counseling the incarcerated. This was a very important ministry for him. But 1917 turned out to be his last year in Russia. Actually, it was a good time to be leaving Russia. But during this period, he served as a lecturer and participated in the All-Russian Council that elected St. Tikhon as patriarchs. At this point, he was canonically resident in the Church of Russia. He also published several works. Some titles are The Quiet Corner of Christ, Collected Sermons, and Message to the Russian People, in which he was calling on Russians to support and defend their fellow Orthodox Serbs. On July 3rd, 1917, a momentous decision was made by the Holy Synod of Russia for Father Madarije. They assigned him to administer the Serbian Orthodox mission of the Russian Orthodox Church in North America. His position was analogous or comparable to that of Saint Raphael Hawawini, right? Saint Raphael came first to the New World as a priest to be in charge of the Syro-Arab mission of the Russian Orthodox priest. Madarije had the same position with regard to the Serbian people. He was to be in charge of outreach to the Serbian Orthodox, who, like the Syrians, had been scattered all over this land. So on July 17th, he departed from Russia and on his way to Philadelphia, where he was made an archimandrite. And in 1918, he was appointed dean of the Serbian Cathedral in Chicago. It was the cathedral for the Serbs, but again, still under the Russian Orthodox Church. And in 1919, he was elected by the Russian Orthodox Church to be a bishop in charge of the Serbian mission, much, again, as St. Raphael was for the Syro-Arab mission. But in the meantime, between his departure from Russia and 1919, what had happened? The Bolshevik Revolution. And what was the effect of the Bolshevik Revolution on the ability of the Russian Orthodox Church to manage its affairs over here in North America? Things started to get cattywampus, shall we say. And so, much as was the situation with the Antiochian Christians and St. Raphael, due to the inability of the Russian Church to effectively administer its affairs in North America, the various ethnic missionary jurisdictions began to seek pastoral care from the respective mother churches, and the mother churches sought to expand their influence over their scattered flocks in America. So the administrative structure that had most of the Orthodox Christians under the Russian Orthodox Church began to fracture and fragment, and hierarchs came from various Orthodox lands to take charge of their flocks here. Because of this, Saint Madarije declined consecration to the episcopate from the Russian Orthodox Church and elected to return to Serbia. In 1920, he arrived in Serbia and was appointed by the patriarch there as the head priest of a monastery in Belgrade and rector of its school. And he also undertook a preaching and lecturing ministry under the auspices of various organizations, including the YMCA, there in the capital city of Belgrade, while he continued to effectively administer the affairs of the monastery. A witness to one of his presentations described him as such. At the podium, he looked like a Byzantine fresco, spiritual, ascetic, alive, picturesque, Full of successful comparisons and inspired by a sincere feeling, he left a strong and unforgettable impression. I forgot about our pictures. Let's show you a few here. This up button doesn't work, just the down button? No, neither of them work. Side button. Oh, so this one worked? Okay. There is Madarije as a young monk. I'm not sure if he had, it's most likely he had been ordained a priest by then because it looks like he has a cross around his neck. Okay, here we go. There he is later as a priest. Oh, we're not there yet. I have to back up. Oh, okay. Okay. So, meanwhile, back at the ranch, the Serbian situation in America was deteriorating and devolving into factionalism over how and with whom it would structure itself. So, in 1921, the Serbian Holy Synod established the former Serbian mission as its own North American archdiocese. And it sent who to be its patriarchal representative? Does anyone know? Someone we've talked about in this series. Any guesses? St. Nikolai Velimirovich was sent to be the patriarchal representative to the newly constituted Serbian Orthodox Archdiocese of North America in 1922. And in 1923, Archimandrite Madarije was sent to assist him and given the same title as a patriarchal representative. But after several months, the Holy Synod granted St. Nikolai's request to return to Serbia, leaving Madarije here alone in charge of the Serbian Orthodox Archdiocese, and still he's only an archimandrite. So what did he find? What did he encounter when he got busy here in the North American Archdiocese? Let me give you a description. This is from a letter he wrote to Patriarch Demetrije. Speaking of the Serbian faithful, if you want to call them that, he wrote, "They consider America a free country and accordingly adjust their conduct towards their superiors. There are priests who, upon receiving an act, a directive from his office, exclaim, 'What? Priests who are my equals want to give me orders?' There are archimandrites who, upon receiving an act from the administration, say the same thing. 'What? An archimandrite who has less seniority than me wants to give me orders?' A dissatisfied priest can easily find support among a dissatisfied segment of the population who, in this land of complete religious freedom, despises all authority and despises it even more in the church, where he feels he is entitled to exercise his powerful ego. Churches in most cases are administered by a small group or even just an individual who generally looks upon the church from the commercial aspect. It didn't take long for them to get Americanized. Most churches are empty for weeks. They're full only at Christmas and Easter. It is hard for me to hear that Serbian brothers persecute each other and hate each other. My heart hurts and I suffer in my soul, and I am ready to lament this even today when one ought not to cry when I see that brothers persecute each other and hate each other." This is his paschal letter to the patriarch. But upon leaving North America, the future Saint Nikolai had told Archimandrite Madarije to find a way, by any means, to purchase land near Chicago. That's where their cathedral church was. That was the center of the Serbian population. And most of the Serbs were employed, I should say, as working in mines, in factories, and that kind of heavy physical work. They were less entrepreneurial than the Syrians, and more of them were laborers, and they worked under very harsh conditions. So, in any case, Bishop Nikolai encouraged him to find a property and to found there a monastery, a theological school, and an orphanage, a place that would serve as the spiritual center for all the Serbian Orthodox of America. So Madarije was obedient to this prompting, heeded the bishop's wise words, and was able to purchase 33 acres of land in the rural area of Libertyville, Illinois. Libertyville was a village about 40 miles north of Chicago, a beautiful place, we're told, where he sought out to build the new monastery. So on September 3rd, 1923, an outdoor divine liturgy and blessing of the waters took place on the spot where the monastery was to be built and dedicated to Saint Sava of Serbia. I don't know if all of you know, but Saint Sava is the patron saint of the Serbian people, and almost every Serbian church in North America is Saint Sava Church. There's a few Saint Georges out there and others, but so his great desire for the completion of the monastery project began to consume Saint Madarije, and it reminded one of the psalmist, "For the zeal of thine house has eaten me up." He built the last dollar from his minuscule wages for the construction needs of the monastery, to the point where many times he had literally nothing to eat and would go without food for days. His flock, seeing his touching dedication, would say, "Madarije is building a monastery, and he himself is starving to death." On December 7th, 1925, he was elected a bishop and returned to Serbia for the consecrations. Because of increasing problems with his health, his doctors advised him to wait till May to travel back to Serbia. He was elected in December. They didn't want him to travel until May. But what did he do? In March, he took off. They had advised him to go to Arizona and recuperate there. It wasn't long before it was the Father Madarije at the time, before he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. So his health was fragile. He was consecrated a bishop on April 25, Palm Sunday, 1926, in Belgrade, and returned to New York on July 14, 1926. You can see here in this picture the unique garb that Serbian Orthodox clerics wear, with the colored buttons and so on. He has a traditional cross and engolpion. Notice also that his beard is trimmed quite differently from the appearance of Greek and Russian bishops. A little bit about his return to New York. His July 14, 1926 return to New York, now as Bishop Madarije, was celebrated with a historic and magnificent welcome. One of his biographers was present at this momentous occasion and wrote, "They expected a despot, but they saw a Lamb of God. What an evangelical pastor, what a servant of God, what a guardian of the flock that was entrusted to him. The young servant of God was meek and full of humane goodness, I should say, ready for sacrifice and to renounce even himself, overfilled with love and thirsty for the goodness of people. As such, he stretched his hands for an embrace and displayed his open heart to all the American Serbs. So he thus began his pastoral ministry. Indeed, the saint began his missionary work with the zeal and passion of a new confessor and martyr. Ignoring his physical weakness, he gave all his mental and bodily strength to organizing the newly established diocese in America. As he wrote, "I visited local churches one by one as each one invited me. The people everywhere were exhilarated to welcome their first bishop." Despite his superhuman self-denial, his illness was serious and at the time incurable. Remember, no antibiotics back in the day. It was a demanding and cruel adversary. And in a note from his doctor, we read, "Bishop Madarije is here under my supervision. His treatment requires a long time, perfect rest, and absence of cares. If he stops in the near future with all of his travels, and if he has rest and proper nutrition, there is hope for recovery." But what do you think? He did. Saintly bishop, however, had no intention of allowing the disease to stop him from his apostolic work. And the more the disease progressed, trying to limit his activities, the harder he fought against it. The more he insisted on giving himself entirely to the ministry of his diocese. On May 24th, 1927, his doctor once again wrote, against a categorical order from his doctors, Bishop Madarije suddenly left Chicago today. He needed to suddenly left for Chicago today. He needed to stay in Arizona the entire summer. I renounce any kind of responsibility for his departure for Chicago. For the sake of his healing and recovery, he went several times to the soothing, blossoming, sunny South to Arizona and came back with more strength and a greater threat. This is what would happen in those times when, due to matters he had to attend to leave Arizona and travel to other parts of America to fulfill his duties. When he would leave, then his health consequently declined. So we can see in the character of Bishop Madarije some curious parallels to the character of Doc Holliday. Both had tuberculosis, both spent time in Arizona, and both ignored the advice of their doctors to rest and take it easy. And that's where the similarity ends. Doc Holliday refused to give up his smoking, drinking, and carousing. Bishop Madarije refused to step back from his apostolic labors. Despite all this, during these years in the late 20s, he made several trips back to Serbia to fundraise for his monastery in Libertyville and to attend meetings of the Holy Synod. Once, because of illness, he had to stay 15 days. And the rumor started that he was offered a diocese there and would not return. Similar to Raphael, if you remember, he actually was offered dioceses on several occasions back in the old countries, prestigious sees. Well, Madarije was not actually offered these dioceses, but the rumor was that he was not going to come back. But he wrote a letter to, once he had heard that this rumor was circulating here back in North America, he wrote a letter to the faithful from Belgrade. He had fallen sick, of course, there in Belgrade and had to stay an extra 15 days. So people were saying, okay, he's abandoned us, he's not coming back. He wrote and told them this: "Despite everything, your love has tied me to you, my flock, and I yearn to go back to you as soon as possible. Do not believe everything you hear. Do not believe the rumor that I will receive one of the dioceses here. I have been, by God's will, tied to the diocese in America and Canada, and know also that I am not thinking of any other position in our church except the one that I have right now. The peak of my earthly longing is to serve to my last day the Diocese of America and Canada, and my dear Serbian people in the New World. Again, another parallel with St. Raphael, who had that same devotion to the flock here, where he could have made his life infinitely more pleasant by staying in the old country and accepting an assignment there. So, through the late 20s into the early 30s, he continued to occupy himself with the foundation of new churches, primarily in the Midwest, I should say, and with the construction of the monastery. And his crowning achievement came with the consecration of the church on the Libertyville property on September 6, 1931. I want to read you a little bit about this from his biography. September 6th, the day of the consecration, will be the day of pride for all Serbian people on this side of the Atlantic. On that day, all the hard work and sacrifices will be crowned. It took too long to build a monastery. The road was a thorny and difficult one. The economic situation of the country was a difficult one. The Serbs, however, succeeded in building a beautiful place they must be proud of. There were some who gave little for the creation of the monastery, and there were some who gave much, but there was one person who gave all, and that was the holy bishop. Knowing his illness required rest, he nevertheless gave day after day to reach the desired goal of erecting the first Serbian monastery in North America. Dr. Božidar Puric, who was a friend of his, wrote that during one of his visits to the monastery during its period of construction, he saw the bishop carrying large, heavy rock slabs on his shoulders. The slabs were to be the path from the entrance of the monastery to the door of the church. When he chided the bishop for lifting such exceedingly heavy things when he knew it would be detrimental to his delicate health, the saint replied that by doing it, he himself was saving the monastery money and resources which were needed elsewhere. Many times, St. Madarije would get on his bicycle and ride miles and miles away to purchase bricks for a price the monastery could afford, and then he would load them onto his bicycle and take them all the way back to the construction site. How he did that, I'll never know, but it couldn't have been a whole lot of bricks. But you see the kind of extent to which he pushed himself for this most important goal that was consuming him. After the consecration, this joyous day, he, of course, continued in his apostolic labors, but his failing health increasingly compromised his efforts. He tried his utmost to hide the severity of his illness, but as the years passed, this became more and more difficult. On Pascha 1934, a year before his repose, he wrote his flock in a heartbreaking torrent of honesty, confessing his soul's anguish. Over the 17 years of my service to God and people in America, I patiently bore my cross. Sometimes it was easy, sometimes it was heavy, but today that cross is heavier than ever before. At one point in time, I was full of ideals, wanting to serve you and leave you with something permanent, you mean the people. But today I am exhausted. My knees are giving way under the weight of that heavy cross. His illness and the great and constant difficulties governing the diocese, did not allow the saint time required to write books or do the many other projects he would have liked to have done. He exhausted himself in his labors. By 1935, it was clear that his end was drawing near. We read that Bishop Madarije did not have a chance to enjoy the fruits of his labor for very long. On December 12, 1935, at only 46 years of age, full of grace and sanctity, the sainted bishop's soul left his body and flew to meet the Savior he had loved so much and had served so long. He spent his last hours on earth at the University Hospital in Ann Arbor, Michigan, accompanied by his dear friend and fellow worker in God's vineyard, the protopresbyter Zivioin Riskanovich. That's my guess. He wrote an account of the saint's passing. He said, the next day, December 11, about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I arrived at the hospital. The nurse had led me into his room. Approaching the room, I heard his voice. I stood at the open door. The bishop was lying down on his back and was looking upward without blinking, as if he was talking to someone. He was saying a prayer out loud. I quietly entered the room and stopped. The bishop kept going, praying out loud without pausing. That prayer was his own, unwritten and never read. He prayed in the Serbian language, switched to English, and then to Russian, and then back to Serbian. It was hard to write down that prayer in words just by my memory. I do recall, however, some words, though. He prayed, receive, O Heavenly Father, me, thy servant. Forgive me my sins. Have mercy on my people, my spiritual children. Keep them by thy might. O Lord, bow down thine ear and hear the cry of the orphans of my brother. His brother had died in a car accident and left two children. Have mercy on all us unworthy ones. Save and have mercy on the Serbian Orthodox people. Forgive me, O God, as I forgive everybody. Amen. Finally, the priest said, I decided to speak to him. I thought that he didn't see me, and so I said, Your Grace, do you see me? I came to visit you. But gazing onward in the same direction, the bishop said, I know you are here. I see you. I see you always, even when you are not with me. Thank you. And then he went on to repeat the same prayer. I sat down and waited. Thank you for coming. See, I have made my peace with the Lord. I am ready. Pray for the repose of my soul. He could not go on. Suddenly he fell asleep like a man who just finished a heavy and exhausting journey, which of course he had. I gave him some water from a little spoon, one spoonful, then another. Then the bishop suddenly looked upward, throwing his head back. Bishop Madarije was no longer breathing. St. Madarije's funeral took place on December 18. He had made some special requests to take place during the ceremonies. These instructions were that on the day of his funeral, 11 priests be elevated to the rank of protopresbyter, 4 others to receive honorary distinctions. Shockingly, several of the priests were among the saint's most bitter foes, ones who had tormented him ceaselessly during his life, slandering him, refusing to subject themselves to his episcopal authority, and cause him nearly constant temptations and sorrow. And yet, despite all this, his last desire was that they be honored and elevated. The Christ-like humility, long-suffering, love, and forgiveness of the bishop shocked everyone. And it's said that the priests, many of such priests, wept bitterly at his casket. At the end of the funeral service, the casket with the saint's body was carried in procession 3 times around the monastery and then placed in the crypt of the church, which he himself had made. At the end, I want to conclude with a tribute written by a fellow Serbian immigrant who described him as such. Bishop Madarije at first sight appears a humble and meek monk of rather melancholic appearance, but underneath that monastic humility and meekness, like a spark within a rock, is a fiery revolutionary of a burning, sanguine temperament capable of great and lengthy battle. What torments were not suffered by that small and physically weak monk? One moment you see him as a fiery reporter, another moment as an apostolic missionary, another moment as a God-given orator and homilist, and in another moment a very skilled organizer. In all these things, Madarije had nothing but success, always modest, meek, and considerate, skillful and introspective. He tirelessly fought and marched forward. People can say whatever they want, but they must admire him, how he lived with his miserable salary, how he walked around in very poor clothing and a cloak in harsh winters to the consecration of churches, and to inspire assemblies for the erection of churches. If any bishop of our day and age can be called a martyr, according to his struggles and battles for the church, then Madarije can be called a great martyr. There he is as a bishop, have his consecration. I should have brought that up early in his episcopal vestments. The translation of the saint's relics took place on May 5th, 2017. Well, I should back up and say, first, he was glorified by the Holy Synod of the Serbian Orthodox Church in 2015, on May 29th, 2015. He was reckoned among the saints. And so upon that, after that, he was disinterred and his relics translated. The translation of the saints' relics took place on Friday, May 5th, 2017. It is customary for Christ is Risen and other Paschal hymns to be chanted during that service. As soon as his casket was open, a beautiful sweet scent poured out. His body was found in a state of incorruption, and his hair and beard were still soft, as if he had fallen asleep only moments earlier. So there in this photograph, you have a picture of the priest uncovering him. He's been wrapped, and there's the grave wrappings. And there you see him lying after he had been clothed. When bodies are found incorrupt, they typically darken and the flesh becomes dry. It doesn't decay, but it becomes dry like beef jerky, right? So that's why his flesh is so dry, dark looking. But he was found to be incorrupt. And as is so common in the accounts of the disinterment, of the translation of the relics of saints, as I mentioned, when his casket was open, a beautiful fragrance came out and filled the church. This is the glorification ceremony when he was glorified, the Holy Synod of the Serbian Orthodox Church. And here his relics are as they are currently found at the monastery in Libertyville, where they're kept, where you can go if you're near Chicago and venerate the relics of this apostolic laborer, whom, as I mentioned several times, was kind of like the Serbian analog of Saint Raphael, working himself tirelessly without reward, without commendation, experiencing health challenges until he finally gave up his soul in the service of Christ and his church. So that burning desire that inflamed him when he was still but a youth in the cathedral at Belgrade proved to be the force, the fuel that fueled his entire life and ministry. It never petered, it never went out till his last day. he served unswervingly and passionately the cause of Christ and the salvation of souls. So I hope by virtue of this presentation that this great man of God, who, like for most of you, as for me, was virtually unknown, will serve as inspiration to faithful Christian life. That's all I have. Any thoughts or questions?
Did he have any, and if so, or if you know, interactions with like other jurisdictions here in America?
Yes, he was known for not solely restricting his ministry to Serbs, but among other Orthodox as he encountered them and so on. And after the consecration of the monastery cathedral, or church, I should say, in Libertyville, the Greek Orthodox Archbishop sent him congratulatory letters and so on. And he ministered to Orthodox Christians wherever he found them. Of course, he spoke fluent Russian as well as Serbian, and Greek I don't know, but yes. Again, in those early times, the jurisdictional boundaries were not clear. People like Saint Madarije and Saint Raphael primarily ministered to their own flocks. They were on that mission to seek out and find the lost sheep of the church in North America. So each to their own people. But yes, he did.
How did he reconnect with his parents?
What's that?
How did he reconnect with his parents?
It wasn't described.
Really?
It wasn't described. I don't know, how they found out, or, I'm sure he did some way, but in the biography. I took this from the book Glorified in America, which is just a chapter in the book. It's not a full biography. I know full biographies exist in Serbian, but again, my facility in Serbian would not allow for me to take advantage of those. So, but again, someone, to us, maybe as Antiochians, or to many Orthodox, Greeks, Russians, someone who would be obscure and unknown to us, but it is, as that beautiful book, Glorified in America, makes clear, this land has really been sanctified by some very holy laborers, some real apostles in the service of Christ. I don't really know, how many monks are there. I'm not sure. It's a functioning institution, as it was intended to be by Bishop Nikolai, sort of the spiritual center for the Serbian Orthodox people in America. They have another one in Jackson, California, in the Gold Country. There's a camp there, and this Saint Sebastian Dabovic is interred there, and he's another chapter in the book, but he's not a hierarch, so he didn't make the cut for the series. But yeah. Serbian Orthodox in North America have tended to remain insular and very ethnically oriented. Their churches typically are basically for Serbians, but that has been changing in the past 20 or 30 years. Like St. George up in Kansas City is very alive, active, outreach, a church of outreach and so on. So the St. Herman Monastery, Father Seraphim Rose and Father Herman were there, now is under the Serbian church. And of course, they're open to everybody. So that's been a really nice development. Thanks for coming out and attending, folks.